Have I got a doozy for you guys? Today I came across a CIA document. CIA document proving that transcendental consciousness is true. Meaning that the collective is true, guys. Check it out. But first I'll share this again.
Before the Jesus story, which all involved crucifixion and a sun god. So again, we have this archetype for what it is to be the Anu, Anunnaki or Anukin, which is to actually have the kind of coherent plasma that can penetrate and inhabit a star, to be a sun god. And so this is more than archetype, it's instruction. And so then if we start applying this to modern myths like Star Wars and Star Trek and Dune, we see that this recurrent myth survives history. And we're going to talk about the archetype of the Anunnaki family, the father Anu, the sons Enki and Lil, as being a sort of the archetype characters of this ancient story. Enki and Enlil are called fish god and snake god in Australia. They're a universal archetype. And Enki in Dune, for example, is Muad'Dib. And waking up to find his father is half machine is Harkonnen. And Enki in Star Wars is Luke Skywalker, waking up to find that his father is half machine Darth Vader. And in each case, there is a recurrent truth behind the myths that actually catch fire. And that's why it is relevant to talk about these myths and see where the truth is, not just historically, but tonight where the truth is scientifically in these myths.
Without further ado, here's the CIA document. We'll go up to the header. 2003, September 10th. So 20 years I sat on this. And it goes right here, it goes on to say, you tasked me to provide an assessment of the gateway experience in terms of its mechanism, or its mechanics, and ultimate practicality. As I set out to fulfill that tasking, it soon became clear that in order to assess the validity and practicality of the process, I needed to do enough supporting research and analysis to fully understand how and why the process works. Frankly, sir, that proved to be an extremely involved and difficult business. Initially based on conversations with a physician who took the gateway training with me, I had recourse to the biomedical models developed by Itzhak Bentov to obtain information concerning the physical aspects of this process. Then I found it necessary to delve into various sources for information concerning quantum mechanics in order to be able to describe the nature and functioning of the human consciousness. Okay, and then it goes on to the steps he took. I began the narrative briefly, fulfilling fundamental biomedical. Okay, it goes on. Get down to the good stuff. Introduction. In order to describe the Monroe Institute technique for achieving altered states of consciousness, gateway experience, involving brain hemisphere synchronization or hemisync, the most effective way to begin is to briefly profile the basic mechanics which overlay operation of related methods such as hypnosis, transcendental meditation, and biofeedback. It is easiest to effectively describe what gateway is by beginning with a short description of those associated techniques that sense some common aspects with the gateway experience, but which are nevertheless different. In this way, we can develop a frame of reference at the outset which will provide useful concepts to explain and understand gateway by comparison as we proceed. Hypnosis. It goes on to explain how that's done. Right here it says, according to the theories of psychologist Ronald Stone, oh, that might have been related to me, and the biomedical engineering models of Itzhak Bentov, Hypnosis is basically a technique biomedical engineering models of, or which permits acquisition of direct access to the sensory motor cortex and pleasure centers and lower cerebral emotional portions and associated pleasure centers of the right side of the human brain, following successful disengagements of the stimulus screening function of the left hemisphere of the brain. The left hemisphere of the brain is the self-cognitive, verbal and linear reasoning component of the mind. It fulfills the function of screening incoming stimuli by categorizing, assessing, and assigning meaning prior to allowing passage to the right hemisphere of the mind. The right hemisphere, which functions as a non-critical, holistic, nonverbal, and pattern-oriented component of the brain, appears to accept what the left hemisphere passes to it without question. Consequently, it is the left hemisphere. If the left hemisphere can be distracted either through boredom or through reduction to the soporific semi-sleep state, external stimuli to include hypnotic suggestions are allowed to pass unchallenged into the right hemisphere, where they are accepted and acted upon directly. Okay, and it goes on. Transcendental meditation. On the other hand, transcendental meditation works in a distinctly different fashion. In this technique, intense or protracted single-minded concentration on the process of drawing energy up the spinal cord ultimately results in what appears to be creation of acoustical standing waves in the cerebral ventricles, which are then conducted to the gray matter in the cerebral cortex on the right side of the brain. As a result, according to Bentov, these waves will stimulate and eventually polarize the cortex in such a way that it will tend to conduct a signal along the homunculus starting from the toes and on up. It's described in a book by Sanella MD entitled Kundalini Psychosis and Transcendence. States that the standing acoustical waves are the result of the altered rhythm of the heart sounds, which are occasioned by prolonged practice of meditation, and which set up sympathetic vibrations in the walls of the fluid-filled cavities, which comprise the third and lateral ventricles of the brain. In addition, according to Bentov, the state of bliss described by those whose Kundalini symptoms have completed the full loop along the hemispheres may be explained as a self-stimulation of the pleasure centers in the brain, caused by the circulation of a current along the sensory cortex. He also notes that most of the described symptoms start on the left side of the body, means that it is mostly a development occurring in the right hemisphere of the brain. Although normally a period of meditation involving intense concentration and practice for 5 years or some is required to bring up the Kundalini. Bentov states that the exposure to mechanical or acoustical vibrations in the range of Okay, 4 to 7 hertz cycles per second for protracted periods may achieve the same effect. Bentov cites as an example repeated riding in a car whose suspension and seat combination produce the range of vibrations of being exposed for long periods of time to these frequencies caused, for instance, by an air conditioning duct. He also notes that the cumulative effect of these vibrations may be able to trigger a spontaneous physio-kundalini sequence in susceptible people who have a particularly sensitive nervous system. Consciousness and energy. It is essential to define the mechanism by which the human mind exercises the function known as consciousness, and to describe the way in which that consciousness operates to deduce meaning from the stimuli which it receives. To do this, we will first consider the fundamental character of the material world in which we have our physical existence in order to accurately perceive the raw stuff with which our consciousness must work with. The first point which needs to be made is that the two terms matter and energy tend to be misleading if taken to indicate two distinctly different states of existence in the physical world that we know it. Indeed, goes on to say matter and energy are two different things, but science now knows that both the electrons which spin in the energy field located around the nucleus of the atom and the nucleus itself are made up of nothing more than oscillating energy grids. Solid matter in the strict construction of the term simply does not exist. Rather, atomic structure is composed of oscillating energy grids, surrounded by other oscillating energy grids, which orbit at extraordinarily high speeds. In his book, Stalking the Wild Pendulum, Ishtak Bentov gives the following figures. And it goes on to talk about 10 to the 22nd power hertz, which means 10 followed by 22 zeros. At 70 degrees Fahrenheit, an atom oscillates at the rate of 10 to the 15 zeros hertz. At the entire molecule, an entire molecule composed of a number of atoms bound together vibrates at approximately 10 to the 3 zeros hertz. The point to be made is that the entire human body, brain, consciousness, and all is like the universe which surrounds him. Nothing more or less than an extraordinarily complex system of energy fields. The so-called states of matter are actually variances in the state of energy, and human consciousness is a function of the interaction of energy in two opposite states, in a manner described in the following paragraph. Holograms, this is what I was talking about, incommensurable, guys. Energy creates, stores, and retrieves meaning in the universe by projecting and expanding at certain frequencies in a three-dimensional mode that creates a living pattern called a hologram. And that's what we're living in, a holographic universe, because we are energy. We are projecting what we see. Our consciousness gives us our reality, folks. Don't forget, this is a CIA document, approved for release in 2003. Laboratory demonstration of Geber's work only occurred years later following invention of the laser. As a biologist, Lyle Watson explains, the purest kind of light available to us is that produced by a laser, which sends out a beam in which all the waves are of one frequency, like those made by an ideal pebble in a perfect pond. When two laser beams touch, they produce an interference pattern of light and dark ripples that can be recorded on a photographic plate. And if one of the beams, instead of coming directly from the laser, is reflected first off an object such as a human face, the resulting pattern will be very complex indeed, but it can still be recorded. The record will be a hologram of the face. The part encodes the whole. Of further importance is the fact that even if we dropped our frozen hologram of the ripple pattern on the floor and broke it into a number of pieces, each individual piece would recreate the entire holographic image all by itself. The smaller the piece, the fuzzier and more distorted would be the resulting holographic projection, but the fact remains that a whole projection would nonetheless be made. The key to creating any hologram is that energy in motion. Energy in motion must interact with energy in a state of rest, non-motion. In the foregoing example, the pebble represents energy in motion, while the water, before its agitation by the pebbles, represents energy at a state of rest. To activate or, in effect, to perceive the meaning of the holograph energy, in this case, a coherent light source interaction between the moving energy and the energy at rest. In the simple example given by Bentov, this requirement was fulfilled by holding the frozen interference pattern in front of the coherent light to project a three-dimensional holographic image, its meaning into space. Another feature of a hologram is its efficiency. Billions of bits of information can be stored in a tiny space. The pattern of the holographic is stored everywhere on a plate. The consciousness matrix. The universe is composed of interacting energy fields, some at rest and some in motion. It is in and of itself one gigantic hologram of unbelievable complexity. According to the theories of Carl Pibram, a neuroscientist at Stanford University, and David Bohm, a physicist at the University of London, the human mind is also a hologram which attunes itself to the universal hologram by the medium of energy exchange, thereby deducing meaning and achieving the state which we call consciousness. With respect to states of expanded or altered consciousness, such as gateway uses, the process operates in the following way. As energy passes through various aspects of the universal hologram and is perceived by electrostatic fields which comprise the human mind, the holographic images being conveyed are projected upon those electrostatic fields of the mind and are perceived or understood to the extent that the electrostatic field is operating at a frequency and amplitude that can harmonize with and therefore read the energy carrier wave pattern passing through it. Changes in the frequency and amplitude of the electrostatic field, which comprises the human mind matrix, determines the configuration and hence the character of the holographic energy matrix, which the mind projects to intercept meaning directly from the holographic transmissions of the universe, then to make sense of what the holographic image is saying to it. The mind proceeds to compare the image just received with itself. Specifically, it does this by comparing the image received with that part of its own hologram which constitutes memory. By registering differences in geometric form and in energy frequency, the consciousness perceives. Wow. Contrary to what everyone knows is so, it may not be the brain that produces consciousness, but rather consciousness that creates the appearance of the brain. Wow. That's crazy. To the extent that the gateway succeeds in bringing about a refinement in energy matrix of the mind, it succeeds in expanding or altering human consciousness so that it can perceive without recourse to the intercession of the physical senses, such that ever more of the universal hologram, not of course accessible by sense perception, can ultimately be perceived and understood. Ferguson has written that the theories of Fibram and Bohm appear to account for all transcendental experience, paranormal events, and even normal perceptual oddities. She goes on to say, currently he is proposing a startling, all-encompassing model that is generating considerable excitement among those intrigued by the mysteries of human consciousness. His holographic model marries brain research to theoretical physics. It accounts for normal perception and simultaneously takes the paranormal and transcendental experience out of the supernatural by explaining them as a part of nature. Like certain strange discoveries of quantum physics, the radical reorientation of this theory suddenly makes sense of paradoxical sayings of mystics throughout the ages. Wow. There's the consciousness energy grid. The left hemisphere conscious grid acts like the mind's computer software to reduce input from right hemisphere to verbal symbols and concepts. The right hemisphere reduces three-dimensional holographic image to two-dimensional go-no-go forecast. Assessment, evaluation, and functioning of their thought processes against various objects. Time-space dimension. And then it goes on and on. intervening dimensions. This is a CIA document, guys. Subatomic particles, Science Digest magazine, dimensions in between. Now that we have postulated the legitimacy of the assertion that the energy forms which compose consciousness can move beyond the time-space dimension, we need to turn our attention to the energy forms which inhabit those dimensions between time-space and the absolute. In doing so, we may better perceive the form that reality assumes when we encounter it in those intermediate dimensions. In this context, Bentov tells us that the causal relationship between events breaks down, movements become jerky rather than smooth, time and space may become grainy and chunky. Perhaps a piece of space can be traversed by a particle of matter in any direction without necessarily being synchronized with a piece of time. Oh my God, that's what's going on. In short, a pair of events will occur in either time or space, the pair not being connected casually, but by a random fluctuation. What Bentov means is that inside the dimension of time-space, where both concepts applying in a general uniform way, there is a proportional relationship between them. A certain space can be covered by energy moving in either particle or wave in a certain time, assuming a specific velocity virtually anywhere in the time-space universe. The relationship is neat and predictable. However, in the intermediate dimensions, beyond time-space, the limitations imposed on energy to put it into a state of oscillating motion are not uniform as they are in our physical universe. This is when Thoth was talking about going past the hounds of the barrier. A myriad of various distortions and incongruities are thus likely to be encountered, such that our nice, neat assumptions concerning the relationship between time and space as we know it in this dimension do not apply. But even more important, access is open to both the past and the future when the dimension of current time-space is left behind. Special status, out-of-body experiences. Although human consciousness can, with enough practice, move beyond the dimension of time-space and interface with other energy systems in other dimensions, the entire process is appreciably enhanced if that consciousness can be detached in large measure from the physical body before such interface is attempted. Once an individual becomes proficient in the technique of out-of-body movement and then reaches the point where he is able to break out of the time-space while out of the body, he gains the advantage of clicking out. Part of his enhanced consciousness while starting from a base located much closer to the dimensions with which he wishes to communicate. In other words, since he is starting from a point much higher up, to use an analogy from the time-space context, that part of his consciousness involved in clicking out will have that much more time to interact in dimensions beyond time-space, because less time is required to traverse the intervening layers. Moreover, once the individual is able to project his consciousness beyond time-space, that energy environment to which it is exposed therein greatly enhancing the extent to which the individual's altered consciousness may be further modified to achieve a much heightened point of focus and much refined oscillating pattern. As a result, a self-reinforcing process should ensue whereby the farther consciousness in the out-of-body state can be projected beyond the time-space dimension, the more its level of energy output would be enhanced, thus promoting the potential for still further travel. The tentative conclusion to be drawn is that the out-of-body state may be regarded as an extremely effective way of accelerating the process of enhancing consciousness and of interfacing with dimensions beyond time-space. If the practitioner of the gateway technique has a choice of concentrating on achieving and exploiting the out-of-body experience as opposed to concentrating his full efforts on expanding his consciousness exclusively from the physical plane, the former would appear to promise much faster and more impressive success than does the latter. Absolute in perspective. It may be helpful at this point to pause and recap. The major aspects of our intellectual journey from time-space to the realm of the absolute. We have spoken at some length concerning an incredibly complex hologram, which is created by the intersection of energy patterns generated by the totality of all dimensions of the universe, time-space included. We have noted that our minds constitute energy fields which interact with various aspects of this hologram to deduce information which is ultimately processed through the left hemisphere of our brains to reduce it to a form that we employ for the process we call thinking. We have implied that this hologram is the finite embodiment in active energy form of the infinite consciousness of the Absolute. It is the title we assigned to that vast pool of energy in a state of perfect rest over which the physical universe is layered, and from whence it comes. Incidentally, to describe this, Bentov uses the analogy of a very deep sea, comparing the still depths of the sea to the dimension of the absolute, while assessing the storm-tossed waves above to represent the physical universe with which we are familiar. The slightly equated currents of the sea to be found in between the turbulent surface and the totally still depths represent energy in the process of either going into rest or approaching infinity, or i.e. approaching infinity or coming out of rest. From the Big Bang to Taurus. Working from the widely accepted Big Bang theory, Bentov presents a conceptual model to depict the process of time-space evolution. The relative position of the universal hologram, that hologram is often called a torus. Wow. Because it is thought to have the overall shape of an immense self-contained spiral. Basing his thesis on recent studies concerning the distribution of quasars and operating on the premise that in the universe smaller processes tend to be mirror images of larger ones. The fractal in a fractal, i.e. the pattern of electrons around the nucleus and atom mirrors the way planets orbit their suns, and so on. The galaxy, the universe, micro to macro. Bentov postulates the following scenario. Taking his cue from the observed capability of quasars to eject enormously concentrated beams of matter from their interiors in a controlled, non-concentric version of the Big Bang. He emphasizes a similar process occurring in the generation of the universe, noting that those galaxies located to the north of our own galaxy are moving away faster than those located to the south, and that those to the east and west are demonstrably more distant. Bentov regards this as substantive evidence that the jet of matter which expanded into our universe has turned back upon itself, eventually forming an ovoid or egg shape. He sees matter in our universe entering the ovoid pattern following ejection from a nucleus composed of extremely compressed energy through a white hole. At the end of its trip to the far end of the ovoid, he sees it departing via a black hole. In such a model, time is observed to be a measure of the change which occurs as energy evolves into new, more complex forms as it progresses along the distance from the white hole side of the nucleus around the shell of this cosmic egg until it enters the black hole. In other words, as energy expelled from infinity and confined within limits by the conscious of the absolute archives achieves form and motion following ejection from the white hole. He said ejection from the white hole. Just kidding. At the top of the egg. Time begins as a measure of cadence of this evolutionary movement as reality goes around the shell of the egg on its journey to the black hole at the far end. The observed distribution of galaxies suggests that our particular universe is located near the top of the egg at the point where matter begins to fall back in on itself, thus explaining the reason why the galaxies to the north seem to be moving away more rapidly as they are caught up in the downturn of the stream of matter towards the far end of the cosmic egg. Next, layered over this cosmic egg is the absolute, which sustains the radiating nucleus from which the original jet of matter issued forth, as the stream of matter moves around the void towards its destination at the black hole, where it... Oh my God, there it is, guys. Oh my God, I didn't proofread this. I swear to God, this is just insane. I love it. I love it. Thank you. Will be reabsorbed into the radiating nucleus and then the absolute. It generates the interference pattern within the cosmic age, which constitutes the universal hologram or torus. Since the torus is being simultaneously generated by matter in all of the various phases of time, it reflects the development of the universe in the past, present, and future, as it would be seen from our particular perspective in one phase of time. By reflecting on this model, it becomes possible to see how human consciousness brought to a sufficiently altered, focused state could obtain information concerning the past, present, and future, since they all exist in this universal hologram simultaneously. In the case of future, because all of the consequences of the past and present can be seen coming together in the hologram, such that the future can be predicted or seen with total accuracy. Moreover, it is possible to see how the implosion of energy patterns would cross and recross to create an incredibly complex, dimensional, developing pattern of evolution. All of the movements of the energies which comprise the universe leave their mark and hence tell their story throughout time. We noted earlier that the out-of-body state involves projection of a major portion of the energy pattern that represents human consciousness, so that it may move either freely throughout the terrestrial sphere for purposes of information acquisition or into other dimensions outside of time-space, perhaps to interact with other forms of consciousness within the universe. Consciousness is the organizing and sustaining principle that provides the impetus and guidance to bring and keep energy in motion without a given set of parameters, so that a specific reality will result. When consciousness reaches a state of sophistication in which it can perceive itself, its own hologram, it reaches the point of self-cognition. Human beings have this form of elevated consciousness, as does the absolute, but in the case of the latter, it is a function of energy and its associated quality of consciousness. In infinity, omniscience and omnipotence is perceptual unity. When energy returns to a state of total rest within the absolute, it returns to the continuum of consciousness in the pool of limitless, timeless perception that resides there. Thus, the more complex an energy system in the material state, the more consciousness it possesses, it maintain its reality. Our consciousness, therefore, is that differentiated aspect of the universal consciousness which resides within the absolute. It accounts for the organization of the energy patterns which constitute our physical body, but is distinctly separate from and superior to it. Since consciousness exists quite apart from and outside of reality, beyond the bounds of time-space, it, like the absolute, has neither beginning nor end. Reality has both a beginning and an end, because it is bounded within time-space. But the fundamental quantum of energy and its associated consciousness is eternal. When reality ends, its constituent energy simply returns to infinity in the absolute. Consciousness is in perspective. Okay, we'll just glim through that one. I gotta go back to this. I gotta show this, guys. Boom, baby. There's my symbol. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's the Anu, yeah. I don't know. I'm just giddy. Tell me what you guys think. I'll leave the link for this. I'll send it to you guys. So, love, peace, chicken grease, y'all. Peace out.